28th May 2023 is a very important date for all IAS aspirants as the UPSC is all set to conduct the preliminary examination. It is on this date that your years of aspiration, months of hard work will be put to test. I'm sure most of you would be worried about your current affairs revision and practice. But you need not worry because we at BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS, we shall be bringing back our flagship Target Prelims 2023 free crash course starting from the 24th of April. In these sessions, we shall be covering more than 900 important current affairs topics through MCQ-based discussions. These sessions will contain in-depth explanations and expert tips to help you ace the exam. As always, these sessions shall be free on our YouTube channel, and all you have to do is to subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you on the 24th of April.
Hello everyone, a very good morning. Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep. Welcome to our daily Hindu analysis. Before we begin, we have a big announcement. As you just saw in the promo, Phase 3 of Target Prelims 2023 is all set to begin from 24th April onwards. We have 22 sessions lined up for you, going all the way till 15th of May, and these sessions would be live on our YouTube channel. This is essentially a free crash course which will go live from 7:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. from 24th April to 15th May. We shall be covering MCQ-based discussions. We shall cover at least close to 900 topics from different subjects so that you can comprehensively prepare for the upcoming prelims. All you have to do is subscribe to our YouTube channel and the Telegram channel so that you'll get access to the detailed schedule as well. We'll be bringing out the detailed schedule very soon. So just subscribe to our YouTube channel and Telegram channel for further details. So with this, let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu Newspaper. In fact, today's newspaper is quite tricky. We don't have many articles which are relevant for the exam. So what I've done is that I've tried to pick the best articles possible. We had to get a little innovative as well. So whatever relevant articles are there, we'll pick them up and we'll try to discuss and analyze them. We have three big articles from page number 10 and page number 12, and we'll also look at some prelims related topics which covers environment ecology, polity and internal security, disaster management and international relations. So there are a few prelim specific topics and few detailed topics as well. So let's break them down one by one. Let's begin with an important column from page number 10 that's relevant for environment and ecology. This column is examining Project Tiger. If you guys remember, just a few days back on the 11th of April, we had a detailed discussion on Project Tiger. Because just last week, Prime Minister Modi unveiled the latest tiger census numbers when he paid a visit to Bandipur Tiger Reserve in Karnataka. This occasion marked the 50th anniversary of Project Tiger, and the initial estimate data from the latest tiger census was also brought out by the Prime Minister. So on this occasion, we had carefully examined this topic and covered all the factual points along with the analysis related to Project Tiger. So for the background, I would suggest you go back later and watch this Hindu analysis session for the 11th of April as well. Now, just focus on the article which is there in today's newspaper. We will examine the success and the flaws in Project Tiger. That is exactly what the writers of this column are doing. So let's go deep into this article and examine the points that the writers are trying to bring out. Because this critical assessment can be very valuable for a mains question in your GS paper 3. You can even expect an essay topic on conservation efforts in India, on tiger conservation or Project Tiger itself. So such analysis, such critical assessments can be very, very important. As you know, Project Tiger was launched in April 1973 as a flagship program of the Government of India to conserve and protect the tiger population in the country. In the last 50 years, it has definitely seen notable success, because tiger numbers had declined drastically in 1970s. It had fallen to around 2,000 tigers in the wild. We managed to increase the tiger population until 1990s before it again saw a decline. By 2006, the tiger population in India had dropped to around 1,400. From hardly around 2,000 to 3,000 tigers between 1970s to 1990s. The tiger population had further dropped and declined to around 1,400 by 2006. That's when Project Tiger was revamped again, it was restructured, and a new institution called NTCA was set up, the National Tiger Conservation Authority, to manage and administer the tiger reserves in the country. So over the last 16 years, Project Tiger has been rejuvenated. We have managed to more than double the tiger population in the wild, and this marks the success of this conservation program. Alright, since it was launched, the project did see some success in the 1970s, 80s and 90s. But there was a break in between where the lost focus and the failure in conservation efforts and the rapid economic growth in India did put stress on the tiger population again in 1990s and early 2000. As tiger numbers declined to around 1,400 and as tigers were on the brink of extinction in India, the project was revamped, it was restructured, and in the last 15-16 years, we have again seen a significant increase in the tiger population. According to latest census data, which was released by the Prime Minister recently, India has recorded around 3,100 tigers, which is a very good jump compared to the 2006 numbers. So that's why many experts, many policy experts, conservation experts, they believe that Project Tiger is indeed a success. But the writers of the column, they go deeper into the topic and they try to examine whether Project Tiger is truly a success. They're not calling it a failure, but however, they're pointing out the flaws, the structural flaws that still exist in Project Tiger and in its implementation. According to the writers, Project Tiger has no doubt succeeded in maintaining a stable tiger population in the country. When the project was started in 1970s, we hardly had around 2,000 tigers left in the wild. Now today, 50 years later, we have managed to retain those numbers, slightly increase that to around 3,000 tigers in the wild. So more or less, over a 50-year time period, we have stabilized the tiger population and maintained those tiger habitats in different geographical regions of India. In southern India, in central India, western India, as well as northern and northeastern India. We have managed to largely stabilize the numbers and hold on to the tiger population, thereby ensuring that India has the largest tiger population in the world. So this marks the success of Project Tiger without a doubt. But however, there are some critical flaws here. There are some problems in the very structure and implementation of Project Tiger. That is what the writers are focusing upon. They are saying that if we don't address these issues, we might lose out on the gains that we have achieved. Alright? Now, if you look at the conservation efforts in India, especially with regard to the big endangered species and the threatened species, India has done quite remarkably well. We have very stringent laws in place such as the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, which was enacted by the then Indira Gandhi government. In fact, this law was instrumental to provide a legal backing for Project Tiger and for the protected areas in our country. Protected areas are nothing but your wildlife sanctuaries, national parks and tiger reserves, which have been accorded legal protection. National parks, wildlife sanctuaries, tiger reserves, they have been accorded with legal protection where human activities are restricted and prohibited in order to protect these sensitive habitats. So without a doubt, India has done quite well as far as conservation efforts are concerned, despite our large population, despite the economic stress and the stress created by rapid urbanization, deforestation and destruction of habitats and the threat posed by hunting and poaching. India has done a decent job in protecting the big species, especially the most threatened species. Be it tigers or leopards, India has sustained very healthy numbers in the wild. India is home to the only surviving population of Asiatic lions at the Gir National Park in Gujarat. India has the world's largest population of Asian elephants. Also, as I told you, we have the world's largest population of tigers in the wild. And the Indian rhinoceros, the greater one-horned rhinoceros, right? It's native to India, to the Indian subcontinent. India has very healthy numbers of the one-horned rhino as well. So when it comes to these big species, India has done quite well. The conservation efforts has yielded results for India. According to the writers, much of the credit goes to the Wildlife Protection Act, which provides very stringent provisions to restrict and prohibit human activities in the protected areas. So the legal and policy measures taken by the then Indira Gandhi government played a critical role, which has been carried forward by subsequent governments. So definitely, it is a positive point. It shows that India has moved forward. We have succeeded in our conservation efforts. But if you truly compare the numbers in 1973 and now with regard to tiger population in our country, the question does come up, whether have we really made progress? Have we really increased our tiger numbers? See, back in 1973, I told you, the primary reason why Project Tiger was launched by the Indira Gandhi government was because our tiger population had dipped to around 2000. This had caused alarm, not just in India, but around the world. Lot of reports came in, especially from Rajasthan, where tigers were being eliminated in large numbers. The tiger population from around 40,000 tigers in 1940s had fallen drastically to around 2,000 in 1970s. This is what triggered the Indira Gandhi government to enact the Wildlife Protection Act and later bring out Project Tiger as a dedicated conservation program. Now, if you compare the numbers today, that is from the latest census, if you look at the 2023 data, the government has told us there are around 3,100 tigers in the wild. So over a 50-year period of time, this is not a very significant jump. Assuming there were around 2,000 tigers back in 1970s, today we have around 3,000 tigers in the wild. This is not a very big jump. Also remember, back in those days, the estimation was not very accurate. So India might have around anywhere between 1,500 to maybe 2,500, 3,000 tigers back in 1970s as well. Now with more accurate numbers, the number still stands at pretty much the same range. You haven't seen a significant jump. 50 years later, more or less the same numbers are being reported, and hence the writers are saying this is not a cause for celebration. In the last 14-15 years, we have been celebrating the success of Project Tiger. Every time the quadrennial census data is brought out, since 2006, India has been celebrating the increasing tiger population. Alright, from 2006, after Project Tiger was revamped and after NTCA was established to manage the tiger reserves, every 4 years a quadrennial tiger census is conducted across the country. This is a very scientific and more accurate estimate of the tiger population. So, from every 4 years, we have been seeing a significant jump in the tiger population. Compared to 2006, yes, we have made a lot of progress. I told you in 2006, we reported around 1,400 tigers. So in 2023, if we are reporting 3,100 tigers, it means we have more than doubled the tiger population. That is a significant success and an achievement for India, no doubt. But is this the true measure? That is what the writers are asking. If you are showing a 6.7% growth rate as of now, if final numbers come out, it will take few more months for the NTCA to come out with the final numbers for the 2018 to 2023 period. The tiger population is likely to jump. It might even jump to 3,300, 3,400. So experts are estimating a 25 to 30% increase in the actual numbers, because the numbers released by the Prime Minister is just an initial estimate. Once final numbers come in, you might see a 25 to 30% jump. But still, this is not very significant, because compared to 1973, we are pretty much at the same level. It's not that we have made a huge jump in tiger population. We had seen a decline actually. If you're comparing it from 2006, if you're taking 2006 as the threshold, as the baseline, then yes, India has done remarkably well. We have doubled our tiger population, more than doubled it. That is great. But if you go back to 1973 and take 1973 as the base year, you will see that we haven't truly made much of progress. We have just stayed where we are. We have just managed to maintain the population we had. We have just stabilized the tiger population. India did bring out strict laws banning hunting and poaching, restricting and prohibiting human activities, but the efforts have not yielded the results it should have. That is what the writers are pointing out. According to the writers, this is a case of conservation amnesia. This is actually a scientific term in conservation, where you shift the baseline conveniently to show success in your conservation. That is, if you shift the baseline, the threshold itself with which you are comparing, then the numbers will obviously differ. The comparison will differ. If you compare today's numbers with 2006 numbers, as I told you, Project Tiger looks like a remarkable success because we have more than doubled the tiger population. But if you shift the baseline to 1973, when Project Tiger was started, you will see that Project Tiger is not a great success. It has only managed to stabilize the population, maintain the numbers we had. We haven't really added the tiger population, right? So this shifting of baseline conveniently is called conservation amnesia, where you forget the actual numbers where you began from. This is often seen in conservation efforts around the world. So environmental experts and scientific experts, they refer to this as conservation amnesia, where you are conveniently shifting the baselines for comparison, thereby showing relative success. Yes, from 2006 we have seen a big success, but if you compare it with 1973, this is not big success, it's only a stabilization of the population. We have only held on to the tiger population, and this is despite all the focus on tiger conservation, despite having strict laws in place, despite having the funds and the political will and support. The tiger has always been a politically sensitive topic. It has electoral implications as well, especially the big cats, tiger, cheetahs, leopards. Conservation of these big species, it has political considerations as well. Every government, irrespective of the ruling party, have backed these efforts. There has been sufficient allocation of funds, strong legal measures and policy framework, lot of allocation of resources, and despite this, we have only held on to the tiger population. So this, according to the writers, is not true success. All right? In fact, the latest data, the initial estimates which have been brought out in 2023, it's actually pointing out to some alarming signals. There are few alarming signs that have come out, which even researchers and experts are pointing out, that in few pockets of India, especially in eastern India and northeast India, tiger population has actually dropped. See, India has a very healthy tiger population in southern India, in parts of central India, in western India and northern India. But if you look at eastern India, specifically the Jharkhand, Chhattisgarh belt, along with the eastern Ghats, stretching from Andhra, Telangana towards Odisha, and the northeastern forests. In these two pockets, tiger population has seen a decline according to the initial census estimates from 2023. So this is not a positive sign. This is an alarming development. This is a direct result of the loss of habitat, the failure to protect the genetic diversity. You're seeing a region-wise destruction of the tiger habitat, especially in eastern and northeastern parts of India, whereas tiger population has been only stabilized in the other parts of India. All right? So what the government has done is that it has often tried to compensate for the losses through a reintroduction program. This has been one of the methods of intervention under Project Tiger. If you look at the implementation of Project Tiger, whenever there has been a decline in tiger population in a tiger reserve or in a particular state, what the government has done is that it has tried to reintroduce tigers from other areas where you have sufficient numbers. As I told you, southern India, central India has very dense tiger population. In the western Ghats, in the Nilgiris belt of Karnataka, Tamil Nadu and Kerala, the tiger population is very healthy. In central India, particularly in Madhya Pradesh, you have a very dense tiger population. So every now and then, if any tiger reserve reported a fall in tiger numbers, the government has simply shifted the tigers. It has relocated them and reintroduced them, similar to the recent reintroduction of the cheetahs. This is an artificial reintroduction which is being done. There are examples as well. Just a few years back, in Panna Tiger Reserve and Sariska Tiger Reserve, tigers disappeared. Tiger numbers had dropped to almost zero in Panna and Sariska. The tigers were brought back here through a reintroduction program. They were brought from other tiger reserves from central India and from southern India, and these tiger reserves were repopulated. So this is not true conservation. This is more like a zoological park where you are bringing animals and just keeping them in an enclosure. So many experts believe this is not true conservation. You are not looking at the ecosystem, the habitat. You're not protecting the other related species, right? despite so much funds and laws and policies and resources, if tigers are disappearing in some tiger reserves, that is not a good sign. And you're just compensating for it by reintroducing tigers from somewhere else. This frequent reintroduction has many adverse consequences, according to experts. Because if you're moving tigers from one region to another, reintroducing them, you are homogenizing the tiger population in the country. You're eroding their genetic diversity. Because see, India has very different ecosystems. You have tropical deciduous forests, evergreen-like conditions in few parts of India. There are mangrove forests where tigers are found. There are arid, semi-arid regions where tigers are found. There are wetlands and forest areas, dense forest areas where tigers are found. We have grassland ecosystems in central India where tigers are found. So in different ecosystems, the tiger population will display genetic diversity. It will be undergoing adaptations according to changes, environmental, climatic changes. And the genetic diversity is good. It will help the species to remain resilient against any adverse changes. And it helps the species to withstand the impact of human pressure, climate change, natural disasters, etc. If you're simply reintroducing tigers from one place to another, you are homogenizing the diversity. You are eroding the diversity, and this is a long-term threat to the survival of the tiger population. So that is a long-term concern that comes up. Reintroduction will not work in the long run. If you're just replacing the tiger population from somewhere else, you're compromising on genetic diversity, and this is not good in the long run for the tiger as a species. The other problem is that tiger, being an apex predator, it sits at the very top of the food chain. It has been seen as an umbrella species. That is, if you protect tiger and its habitat, definitely you can protect many other related species as well, which are part of the food chain. If this is done in the right way, it is good for the ecosystem, it's good for the different species as well, which are linked with the tiger. That is how conservation efforts actually work. When you're conserving one species, the benefits are not limited to that species. The efforts of conservation will reflect on other related species as well in the food chain. It will reflect on the whole habitat and the ecosystem. But in India, what has happened is that we have focused excessively on the prey base. See, it's a given fact that tigers will thrive wherever there is a high prey base. This should happen naturally again, right? And through the right conservation interventions. But what India has done is that there is one flaw, one very important structural flaw. We have increased the cheetal population. Instead of focusing on the whole ecosystem and other related species, we are focused only on one particular prey, that is the cheetal. The cheetal belongs to the deer family. The cheetal population has been increased in our forests and grasslands, along with providing enough watering holes which are artificially created inside the tiger reserves. To provide water for the tigers during dry season, forest officials, they create watering holes, which are artificial watering holes actually. So when you're taking up such measures, there are few adverse long-term consequences of this. The protection of the cheetal species and the neglect of the habitat and the other species has led to the cheetalification of tiger reserves. The cheetal population has exploded. There is an exponential increase in cheetal population, which is threatening other related species. For example, again, if you look at the Kanha Tiger Reserve, the explosion in cheetal population threatened another endangered species, the Barasinga. The Barasinga, they depend on tall grass in open grasslands. The hard ground Barasinga, which is an endangered species on the IUCN Red List, felt threatened because of the explosion in cheetal population. As cheetals would eat away the tall grass, thereby limiting the food availability for the Barasinga. Yes, by increasing cheetal population, tigers had enough prey base, no doubt. It helped in increasing tiger population, but we have artificially led to the cheetalification of our tiger reserves. The large increase in cheetal population has adversely affected other related species, and it has put a stress on the whole ecosystem. This is another structural flaw, because see, cheetal, it inhabits a transition area called as ecotone. Alright, it's a very important point even for your prelims. UPSC could ask you in prelims, what is ecotone? Ecotone is basically a transitional zone. It's a transition area between one type of habitat and another type of habitat. Now let's say there is a terrestrial ecosystem which is interacting with the aquatic ecosystem. The middle area is the transitional area. Just look at this graphic here. You can see a terrestrial ecosystem here, right? Where you have trees, shrubs, grass, etc. and few specific species that are limited to terrestrial land-based ecosystems. On the other side, you have an aquatic ecosystem, maybe a river or a coastal water body, maybe a sea or ocean or estuaries, lakes, etc. So this is an aquatic ecosystem here. In between, you will have the ecotone region. Ecotone is this transition area where this land or terrestrial ecosystem transitions into an aquatic ecosystem. The transitional area called ecotone is extremely crucial, extremely important because it displays a lot of diversity. It brings the best features of both the neighboring ecosystems. That's why ecotones are very important in conservation efforts. Now in a forest, if you have a wetland, right, there will be a transitional zone between the forest and the wetland ecosystem. Those transitional areas are very critical for conservation because this is where you find a diverse set of species. But if we are promoting just one species, if there is an explosion in the numbers of the cheetahs, which actually thrive in the ecotone, it will harm the other species present in the ecotone. It will destroy the diversity of the ecotone, makes it more vulnerable because there is a sudden explosion in one population. Even though you're creating a good prey base for the tiger, it's harming the other species like the Barasinga. This is a structural flaw that the writers are pointing out. The reintroduction and promotion of prey base, just promoting one type of species and creating artificial watering holes, they could have long-term unintended consequences. You can't even quantify them. You can't even measure them. Is that clear? Water is something that should be naturally found by the animals. If this is being artificially provided just to sustain the tiger numbers, it might disrupt the natural cycle, the natural equilibriums that exist. So these are some critical flaws that have been pointed out by the writers, and hence they're calling for a decentralization effort so that Project Tiger can be democratized. That is the very title of the article as well. They're calling for a greater democratization of Project Tiger. See, on the 11th of April, when we discussed Project Tiger, I had told you that local communities have been given a role under Project Tiger. The forest dwelling communities, the traditional forest dwellers, they do play an important role in tiger conservation. Project Tiger is specifically paying attention to the local communities. But however, the implementation of the program is still largely centralized. It is only the government authorities, government entities which are playing the lead role. The government does work with NGOs, private organizations and local communities, but it is very, very limited. There is no dedicated policy framework to enable ordinary citizens and local communities to play a role in conservation. It's not enough. Even though Project Tiger gives a role for local communities, they are not being incentivized. There is no strong incentive for local communities to participate in tiger conservation. That is what the writers are calling for. In India, conservation has become limited to our protected areas. That is the national parks, tiger reserves, etc. That's why I told you, our conservation efforts, even though it has seen a lot of success, it's become a model where you're creating zoological parks in the name of national parks and tiger reserves. These are natural habitats where population is being artificially cultivated and protected. That is not sustainable in the long run. You need true population surviving in the wild, thriving in the wild. And this requires collaborative effort between the government, local communities, NGOs and other non-state actors. That's why the writers are calling upon the government to decentralize Project Tiger and the efforts to conserve the key species in India. They're calling upon the government to rope in the academia, environmental experts, ordinary citizens, indigenous communities, even private businesses and NGOs, and give them the right incentive. For example, local communities can play a very important role in preventing forest fire, in tackling hunting and poaching. Local communities can play a critical role, but the problem is they are not being incentivized. Even though they have been roped into conservation efforts, the right incentive doesn't exist for them. The writers are suggesting local communities can be given either a paid task or a paid work in terms of conservation efforts, or they could be allowed to collect minor forest produce, even though there are some provisions related to this, like the Forest Rights Act, for example. Then you have the Forest Conservation Act. There are a few laws which does recognize the local community's role, but it's not being genuinely implemented on the ground. That's why the writers are calling for a greater decentralization of conservation efforts, and they're asking for democratization of Project Tiger to see some actual changes on the ground. Is that clear? So they're not saying Project Tiger is a failure. That's not the argument here. Project Tiger has seen success, without doubt. But if you make a true comparison with the 1973 numbers, it's not a very big jump. We have only stabilized the population, and alarmingly, we are seeing a decline in certain parts of India, in Northeast India and Eastern India. That's why the writers are bringing out these practical problems and implementation related problems which need to be addressed. All right? So that is the final assessment that you need to take away from this important article. Now moving on, let's take a look at the next article from page number 12, which is related to a very important grouping called the G7 grouping. The G7, or the Group of Seven, it's an intergovernmental political and economic forum of the developed industrialized nations of the world. The members of G7 include Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, United Kingdom and the United States. These are the 7 countries which are part of this grouping called the G7. They represent the most industrialized, the most wealthy countries of the world. Even European Union participates with the G7 as a non-enumerated member. It brings together these like-minded democracies. All of them are free market capitalist economies. They are the most advanced economies according to the IMF and the World Bank. They share similar political values as well. They're all open democracies where liberal, modern, fundamental rights are protected. So these like-minded democracies, developed countries, industrialized nations have come together to form the G7. All right? This group plays a critical role in dealing with some important geopolitical and economic issues of the world. This grouping traces its origin to the 1970s, when the world was hit by the oil crisis of 1970s, and when this was affecting the global economy. That is when the developed industrialized nations came together and formed the initial version of this group. Few other members were added slowly later, and it eventually became the G7. For a brief period, it even became G8 when Russia was also added into the group. Please remember this point. It was G8 because Russia was also added as a member later in 1990s. But in 2014, Russia was removed. It was thrown out after Russia annexed the Crimean Peninsula of Ukraine. As Russia got aggressive against Ukraine and annexed the Crimean Peninsula, the Western countries boycotted Russia and they threw out Russia from the group, and thus G8 again became the G7. But this group has always played an important role in looking at important global issues, be it terrorism, climate change, sustainable development, the financial crisis and the economic situation, geopolitical developments. All these global issues are discussed and solutions are worked out by these developed industrialized countries. The G7 is going to hold this year's summit in Japan. Japan is the current chair of G7. It's holding the presidency of G7 and it's going to host the 2023 summit next month at Hiroshima. All right, these are important facts for your prelims. So right before the summit, a conference has taken place yesterday at Sapporo. Sapporo is a city in Japan again. So at Sapporo, a conference of climate and energy ministers of G7 has been held, and that is what the article is focusing upon. Also, please note down, India is also often invited to participate in G7 summits. Recently, when UK hosted the G7 summit, India had been invited. India took part with the G7 countries. So there are other big emerging economies which might be invited as a guest country. Of late, India is frequently invited by G7. This year's host, Japan, also has invited India as a guest country to participate in all the summits and conferences. So before the main summit, which will happen in May, a climate and energy ministers meeting was held at Sapporo, the Sapporo conference. This is also a prelims point. UPSC might ask you, the term Sapporo conference recently seen in news is related to what? It's related to a climate and energy ministers meeting of the G7 countries. During this meeting, the G7 energy ministers and climate ministers, they have made a very, very important commitment. They have agreed in writing, they have brought out a joint statement, and they have given a commitment to phase out carbon-based electricity by 2035 and accelerate the adoption of renewable energy in order to phase out coal and fossil fuel-based resources. Is that clear? They have taken a commitment, a written commitment, to ensure that the electricity they are going to generate, produce and consume will be carbon-free by 2035. They will eliminate coal-based power, that is thermal power, will be eliminated entirely by 2035 by these countries, and they will shift to clean renewable energy as far as their electricity is concerned. This is a big commitment that the G7 countries have made. Initially, the proposal was to keep a deadline for 2030. They wanted a prior deadline to phase out coal, but later this was shot down by few countries like US. Few European countries wanted a stricter deadline so they could tackle climate change and global warming by quickly phasing out coal-based power and ensuring that they move towards a carbon-free electricity market. But US and few other countries opposed it because they want to rely on gas. They want to continue using gas if there are shortfalls in their energy supplies. If they face any shortfall in their energy supplies, they want to retain the option of relying on gas for producing electricity. So as a result, the deadline was pushed to 2035 and the focus is only on phasing out coal-based power. All right? But still, it's still a major commitment that these countries have made, and they have also taken a commitment to step up their investments in clean and renewable energy, especially solar and wind energy. They have given a written commitment to ensure that 1,000 gigawatts of energy will be produced through solar power by 2030 and 150 gigawatts of wind power through offshore wind platforms by 2030. All right, the G7 countries will set up offshore wind platforms in the seas and oceans. They will set up wind turbines, windmills to generate 150 gigawatts of electricity. They'll invest more in solar plants to produce at least 1,000 gigawatts of electricity by 2030. And they have committed to phase out inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Usually, dangerous and harmful fossil fuels like diesel, coal, etc., even gas, they are often subsidized by various governments. Both by developing and developed countries, fossil fuels are often subsidized to protect the weaker sections, to protect the economy. The governments give a lot of subsidy, right? They bring down the prices by compensating for the increase in prices. The government subsidizes the rise in prices. This happens quite often in many countries. The G7 countries have agreed to phase out any such inefficient subsidies related to fossil fuels. And they have reaffirmed their commitment to eliminate inefficient fossil fuels starting from 2025. By 2025, they are moving away from inefficient fossil fuels, and by 2035, they want to move towards a carbon-free world. They all have made commitments towards carbon neutrality, to achieve carbon net neutrality by 2040 to 2045. Most of these developed countries are aiming to achieve carbon net neutrality or net zero emissions. This is part of their commitment that they have made to the Paris Agreement under the UN Climate Change Convention. So these commitments of G7 countries is in line with their climate change commitments. All right. Now this affects India. The policies of G7 and the push they are giving for moving towards clean energy and achieving net zero emissions has an impact on India. As I told you, India is often invited to participate in G7 meetings. This time as well, Japan has invited India as a guest country. So India's Environment Minister, Bhupendra Yadav, also participated at the Sapporo conference. At the Sapporo conference of Climate and Energy Ministers, India's Minister for Environment and Forest and Climate Change was also a participant. So here, India has expressed some concern when these countries adopted these commitments to phase out coal and to eliminate inefficient fossil fuel subsidies and to adopt clean renewable energy. There were some concerns brought out by India. Recently, when the COP26 summit took place at Glasgow in 2021, this was the 26th Conference of Parties to the Climate Change Convention, held a couple of years ago. During COP26, India had opposed the usage of the term phasing out. During Glasgow summit, countries wanted to include the term phase out of coal. India objected to this. India said we are a developing nation. Developing, underdeveloped countries, they should be given more window to phase out. That is why India pushed for an alternative word called phasing down, which means you'll reduce the consumption. You'll not eliminate, you'll not put an end to your dependency on fossil fuels. Because see, when it comes to climate action, you should understand the principle of equity that India is trying to promote. From 1990s, since the climate change negotiations started, India has always promoted a principle called CBDR. It stands for Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. The objective of fighting climate change is common. It's common to every country. Every country has a goal to fight climate change, to reduce emissions. But the effort we take should not be the same. It should be differentiated from one country to another based on their historical emissions. Not every country has contributed equally to global warming. It's largely the developed countries, industrialized nations, Western countries, which have burnt fossil fuels from almost 2 centuries. They have developed their economies because of that, and they are mainly responsible for historical emissions. They are primarily responsible for climate change. Whereas developing countries like India, even China to an extent, Brazil, South Africa, Turkey, Indonesia, they're contributing to climate change and emissions in the last 20-30 years. Whereas developed industrialized nations have polluted since 200 years. This is where India and others are trying to draw a distinction. We have promoted this principle of climate equity called CBDR, Common but Differentiated Responsibilities. We agree that fighting climate change is a common objective, but the responsibility we take need not be the same. It should be differentiated from country to country based on their historical contribution, based on their historical emissions. So India's position is that developing countries, underdeveloped nations, small island states, least developed countries, they should be given a greater window to phase out coal and other harmful fossil fuels. Countries like India, they have to rely on fossil fuel subsidies to protect the farmers and the weaker sections in the small industries. We can't immediately phase out these subsidies that we are giving to coal and other forms of dirty and inefficient fossil fuels. Yes, we know they are inefficient, but we can't overnight move away from these fossil fuel sources. Their policies does lead to pressure on India because Western countries have been forcing India to adopt net zero targets by 2045 or 2050. This is unacceptable to India. We have adopted a net zero target for 2070 to 2075 period. We have given a commitment under Paris Agreement that we will achieve net zero emissions somewhere around by 2075. That is the period where we are looking at. India says we deserve this extra window because we are a developing nation. We haven't contributed much to climate change. Today, yes, we are a large polluter, but we weren't big polluters 30, 40, 50 years back. It was Western countries which polluted, which released all the emissions. They are primarily responsible. So the commitments that these countries make, it's fine, it's good, it's appreciable. But if they try to force it on countries like India, that is where the problem arises. If they expect India as well to move away from coal-based power by 2035, it's not possible for India. We will continue relying on coal and even on gas at least till 2050 to 2060. We aim to phase out coal maybe around 2050, not before that. All right? But we are making our own commitments. We are moving towards clean and renewable energy. India today is a leading country which is investing in solar and wind power. Right? So we don't appreciate the pressure that comes from the Western industrialized nations. That is why we are closely observing the commitments that these countries have made at the G7. India is not party to it. We are not part of the commitment the G7 countries have made, but we closely observe them. We have participated in the meeting as well. But our concern is we want the developed countries to assist developing nations and underdeveloped countries by providing finance, by sharing technology, clean renewable technology, and give assistance to move away from fossil fuels. That is the stand India has always taken consistently, and even now India has expressed the same concern. Alright, so this topic is very, very important both from a prelims point of view and also for your mains. Alright, now moving on to another important article from page number 12. It's related to social issues and social justice. The topic is related to homosexuality and the right of the LGBTQIA plus community to legally solemnize same-sex marriages. The topic of homosexuality and same-sex marriages is a very divisive topic in India and in many other countries as well. In India, we had a notorious provision. We still have it. That is section 377 of the Indian Penal Code. This is a colonial era provision that had criminalized homosexuality. Is that clear? It essentially deals with any sexual intercourse against the order of nature. Alright, this is a very colonial law rooted in religious orthodoxy and social conservatism. It's a very conservative provision coming from British colonial Britain, and this provision had criminalized homosexuality in India. In 2018, the Supreme Court delivered a landmark judgment. It's a historic case. It's the Navtej Singh Johar case. Please remember this landmark case. In the Navtej Singh Johar case, the Supreme Court decriminalized homosexuality, thereby modifying section 377 of IPC. Is that clear? Section 377 still remains in the law books. It also deals with other forms of unnatural sexual intercourse. But however, homosexuality under section 377 has been decriminalized in the Supreme Court in the Navtej Singh Johar case. This was a huge victory for the LGBTQIA plus community in the country. For gay men, for lesbians, for bisexuals, transgenders, for asexuals, right, and other gender minorities and sexual minorities who align with a different sexual orientation. It was a huge victory, a landmark victory as far as their sexual rights and basic social rights were concerned, right? But even though same-sex relations were decriminalized, same-sex marriages in India have no legal validity. There is no legal way for you to get legally married in India. Is that clear? Homosexuals do not enjoy that right. And this has put a lot of stress on homosexuals in the country, on the LGBTQIA plus community. A study has come out recently, that is what the article is referring to. It points out that the lack of legal protection and legal recognition to same-sex marriages places a lot of social stress and mental stress on members of the homosexual community and the LGBTQIA plus community. There are many jurisdictions in the world where not just homosexuality is recognized, but same-sex marriages are given legal validity. Without legal validity, the marriages will have no legal validity at all, right? The children born out of these unions, the issues related to adoption, inheritance, they all take a hit if you don't give legal recognition to same-sex marriages. There are certain progressive jurisdictions in the world which have given this recognition already. Please look at this infographic here, it's very, very important. Few progressive countries in Europe, especially in Western Europe, like Belgium, Netherlands, Spain, Norway, Sweden, Portugal, and the others, they've all legalized same-sex marriages. They give legal recognition to it. Jurisdictions like United States as well, right? In some states of the US, same-sex marriages are legally allowed. Legal validity is given to it. Australia, South Africa, all right, and all these countries that you see here in the list, including Canada, most of them have legalized same-sex marriages in some form or the other. All right, but India is still way behind the curve even though it has been decriminalized, even though homosexuality has been decriminalized, they don't enjoy, members of LGBTQIA plus community, right? They don't enjoy the legal right to marry their partner. All right? So this is a erosion of basic human rights and fundamental rights. That is why activists have approached the Supreme Court recently. The Supreme Court has accepted to look into this case to give directions to the central government to frame a law recognizing same-sex marriages in the country. A legal movement has started. That's why the topic becomes very relevant for the exam. All right? If decriminalizing homosexuality was one landmark step, the next landmark for India would be to give legal recognition to same-sex marriages. According to the study, if legal validity is given, it will eliminate the mental stress, it will reduce the mental stress on members of LGBTQIA plus community. Is that clear? But the government is strongly opposing this at the Supreme Court. In the initial hearing which took place recently, the representative of the center took a stand against same-sex marriages, thus highlighting the conservative approach of the government. The government said that Indian society, Indian culture is not ready to accept it. Right? These are outdated, orthodox, conservative views, which still guides not just India, many other countries as well. Even in US, you have few conservative states where similar approaches are taken. Right? So that is why this movement that you're witnessing and the latest case which has been filed at the Supreme Court could very well give rise to a landmark judgment where same-sex marriages could be given legal validity. Supreme Court might push the government to bring out a law to legalize same-sex marriages. So please watch out for this case. We will discuss this development as well whenever there are any major progress in this case. But I just wanted to give you this idea that the topic of same-sex marriages is currently a trending topic in India. All right? So it's a very important topic under social issues and social justice. Now let's move on to the prelims section. Let's look at 5 important articles with regard to prelims. We have an important article from Environment and Ecology, all right, according to which the Indian Army is considering the construction of Bailey bridges in the Kaziranga National Park to help protect the one-horned rhinoceros or the Indian rhinoceros. We spoke about this species earlier as well. The Indian rhinoceros, also called Indian rhino or the greater one-horned rhino, they all mean the same. The great one-horned rhinoceros, greater one-horned rhinoceros or Indian rhino, Indian rhinoceros, all these names refer to the same species. They are native to the Indian subcontinent. Is that clear? Historically, they were found in India, Nepal, Bhutan, today's Bangladesh. This is where the Indian rhinoceros was found. Now it's largely restricted to few parts of Northeast India, few parts of Nepal and Bhutan. This is where you find the one-horned rhinoceros. All right? And the most important and most popular habitat for the Indian rhinoceros is the Kaziranga National Park in the state of Assam. This is a threatened species. It is listed as vulnerable on the IUCN Red List. Please note down this point. Rhinos face a very big threat from hunters and poachers. Hunting is the biggest threat because the horn of the rhino is a prized wildlife product in the illegal wildlife trafficking markets, especially in Southeast Asia, in China, in Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, in Myanmar. In all these Asian cultures, there's a lot of superstition associated with the horn of the rhino. It also finds application in traditional Chinese medicine as well. This is all based on superstition. So this creates a very lucrative market for the horn of the rhino. Hunters target the rhino for the horn and they traffic this into these wildlife trafficking markets. This poses the single biggest threat for the Indian rhinoceros. Plus habitat destruction due to deforestation, urbanization and the economic human pressure. The other stress factor here is the Brahmaputra river. The Brahmaputra, which flows in the rhino belt right next to the Kaziranga National Park, it flows through the national park as well. It floods every year. I'm sure you know that Brahmaputra is known for its intense flooding during monsoon season. These massive floods of the Brahmaputra in the Brahmaputra basin poses a direct threat to the survival of the Indian rhinoceros. Is that clear? So forest officials at Kaziranga National Park have been struggling to move around and protect the rhino species, to tackle hunting and poaching, to protect the species from floods. A lot of protection camps have come up within Kaziranga National Park, but the movement of forest officials has been affected, especially during the flooding season. When the national park floods, forest officials have to rely on wooden bridges which are very old. They are falling apart. They are not reliable for movement of forest officials who are involved in conservation efforts. So to assist them, the Indian Army has proposed, the Eastern Command of the Indian Army has proposed the construction of Bailey bridges. You can see a Bailey bridge here in the image. You might have seen this in Ladakh, in Jammu and Kashmir, right? The army specializes in building such bridges using steel columns. These bridges can be assembled very, very quickly. In a matter of few hours, these bridges can be built. All right? This is a specialization of the engineering division of the Indian Army. It provides for logistics, for troop movement, for troop deployment in conflict zones. The same technology is being proposed for a national park for the first time. Because the national park gets flooded and affects the movement and wooden bridges cannot be relied upon, the Indian Army has proposed to build Bailey bridges in Kaziranga National Park so forest officials can move around to protect and conserve the Indian rhino. Alright, so that is what you need to know from this article. Next, we have another important article on page number 6, in fact 2 articles related to the well-being of the Indian community abroad. It's related to the safety and well-being of Indian diaspora abroad, which is a very important topic for mains under IR, and it's also relevant for prelims under international relations. Just yesterday, we spoke about this topic. I told you about the crisis which has broken out in Sudan, the civil war-like condition which has broken out again. Intense fighting has broken out between the army, the paramilitary forces, militant groups. There's a struggle for power going on in Sudan, and a lot of people have been killed yesterday. Today we actually have another article in the foreign news section page, which details the crisis which has started in Sudan. Yesterday I told you that there are few Indians in Sudan. They face a risk. Indian embassy has warned them to stay indoors. Indian embassy is closely monitoring the situation, trying to help out the Indian community which is trapped in Sudan. And as we predicted yesterday, unfortunately, an Indian national from Kannur in Kerala has lost his life. During these clashes in Sudan, an Indian citizen has been killed. And the Indian embassy is now trying to bring his body back to India so that the family can pay last respects. This is a very serious risk that Indian community faces abroad, especially in West Asia and in North Africa. This is a very volatile region where there are numerous conflicts going on. There is terrorism, civil war situations in many countries. Hundreds and thousands of Indians are often trapped in these conflicts. This is not new to India. All right? There is another incident in Dubai. On the same page, we have one more article. A massive fire in a residential complex in Dubai has killed 4 Indians. Again, they're all from Kerala. This highlights the risk for the safety and well-being of the Indian community abroad. All right? So it becomes a mandate of India's Ministry of External Affairs to protect the Indian community, protect them from these war-like conditions, ensure their safety and well-being, evacuate them on time if required. Also look at the policies of other countries, the labor policies, the welfare policies of other countries, social security policies of other countries, and whether they help Indian workers or not. For example, in Dubai, these Indian workers who have lost their lives, it's an accident, right? The government of UAE cannot be blamed for this. But however, if they have social security and welfare in place, let's say they had insurance and pension, at least the family will get some compensation, right? This is a critical issue. In West Asian countries, employers, they don't often provide the right welfare benefits for Indian workers. They underpay them. They don't pay them the right salaries. They don't provide them with social security, with insurance and pension, right? So this is a key issue India needs to tackle. We have to work with these countries to change their policies to protect Indian workers. All right? So that is what you need to understand. It's a top priority for India. Evacuating Indians when necessary from conflict zones, from war-hit areas, is a priority to ensure the safety of Indians abroad. Similarly, working with foreign governments and ensuring the right policies which will protect the Indian workers abroad, the Indian community abroad, is also a top focus. There have been many instances where thousands of Indians have been trapped in foreign countries. For example, in 1990, when the Gulf War broke out, after Iraq had invaded Kuwait, almost 95,000 Indians were trapped in Iraq and Kuwait. Alright, Saddam Hussein had invaded Kuwait for geopolitical reasons. The US also got into this conflict and attacked Iraq at that point of time. During this conflict, 95,000 Indians were trapped in Iraq and Kuwait, and India had to organize a massive airlift to bring back the Indians who were trapped. India had to leverage its ties and contacts with Iraq and Kuwait. India was very close to Iraq and Saddam Hussein at that point, because Iraq has always been a top oil supplier to India. So from India, I.K. Gujral traveled to Iraq, met with Saddam Hussein, and Indian Foreign Ministry played a key role in working all the contacts in the region to mobilize the civilian aircrafts and ships through which Indians can be brought back and evacuated back to India. This was one of the world's largest human evacuations in human history. Alright, then we had a similar situation in 2006 in Lebanon. Lebanon descended into a civil war in 2006. Thousands of Indians were trapped, and Indian Navy was deployed here to bring the Indians back home safely. Is that clear? Fortunately, Indian naval ships were coming through the Mediterranean from Europe. They were participating in a military exercise with European countries, and they were passing through the Suez Canal when the civil war broke out in Lebanon. These Indian naval ships were diverted to Lebanon to evacuate the Indian citizens. Around 5,000 Indians were rescued. The same would happen in 2011 in Libya, when Libya descended into a civil war because of the Arab Spring Revolution. Around 15,000 Indian workers were trapped, mainly Indian nurses were trapped. They were all evacuated under Operation Safe Homecoming. The then Manmohan Singh government deployed the assets of the Indian Navy, Indian Air Force. Even Ministry of Civil Aviation was roped in, Ministry of Shipping was roped in. Commercial aircraft, commercial ships were also hired, because 15,000 Indians had to be brought back. And Libya is located very far away, right? This showed India's diplomatic reach, military reach as well. Because to work out such evacuations in a conflict zone, you need a lot of contacts, a lot of influence. You need your foreign ministry, intelligence agencies, armed forces, your airlines, private airlines as well, to coordinate and work together, right? You need immense national resources to carry out such complex evacuations. It's a logistical nightmare. And India has done this repeatedly and successfully. In 2014, when Yemen descended into a civil war, India carried out Operation Rahat. Alright? In 2021, when Taliban recaptured power in Afghanistan, India carried out Operation Devi Shakti to bring Indians back. In 2022, when Russia attacked Ukraine and around 20,000 Indians, mainly medical students, were trapped, India carried out Operation Ganga to evacuate the Indians who were trapped in Ukraine. So we have a history of such large-scale evacuations, and you should be aware of this. You should know the names of these missions, in which country were these missions carried out by India to evacuate Indians who were trapped in a conflict zone. Alright, so that is why the topic is very relevant, very important. Even though the articles are not mentioning that, I'm just moving away, I'm going beyond the article here, trying to help you understand how even these topics can become important for your exam. Alright, next, on page 12, we have a topic related to disaster management. It's related to heat wave conditions. As you know, summer season has started in India, which means a very uncomfortable weather condition across most parts of India, right? Northern India, central India, even few parts of western and even few parts of southern India, they quite often suffer from heat wave conditions. The IMD, India Meteorological Department, which monitors the temperatures, often declares heat wave conditions in several parts of India. Alright? Recently, there are few parts of India suffering from heat wave conditions. In West Bengal, schools have been shut for a week because of the prevalent heat wave conditions. In Navi Mumbai, there was a government function where hundreds of people were exposed to intense sunlight and the heat wave conditions. Many people have suffered from the consequences, and 11 people have died out of heat stroke. This is a highly unfortunate, disastrous incident, because this is avoidable. Human deaths arising out of heat wave is completely avoidable if you take the right steps. That's why you need to understand the health impact of a heat wave. This could be a prelims question. What measures can you take to protect yourself during heat wave conditions? Both the topics are very important. See, extreme heat in the range of 40 degrees plus, 45 plus, these are very abnormal temperatures, and that too if it sustains for 2 consecutive days, right? And if you witness the start of a heat wave condition, it is extremely dangerous for human physiology and human health if you are exposed to it for a long period of time. Alright, the human body maintains an ideal core body temperature. This fluctuates when you are exposed to such adverse conditions. It will lead to intense and extreme dehydration as you sweat excessively. The sweating will drain you out of water and nutrients and essential salts and minerals, inducing muscle cramps as well. It could lead to heat exhaustion and eventual heat stroke, which is a life-threatening fatal condition. When you suffer a heat stroke, your core body temperature would have crossed the normal levels. Alright? And this leads to multi-organ failure, internal organ failure, which is a fatal condition that could result in death. That is exactly what has happened in Mumbai. 11 people have suffered from heat stroke. So you can take a lot of measures to protect yourselves. One, you should always seek shelter. The government also plays a role here, because see, heat wave is a disaster. As part of disaster management efforts, one, you need to predict and issue alerts regarding heat wave conditions. The IMD is already doing this as part of preparedness measures, right? This is a part of the preparatory phase in disaster management. You can accurately predict the temperatures, the start of heat wave conditions, the regions where it will occur, and issue timely alerts. So early warning and forecasting is available here. This is the first step. Next, spreading awareness amongst the public, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, right? Taking shelter is an immediate and a very urgent measure. You can't expose yourself to such intense heat for long periods of time, especially during the daytime between 10 a.m. to let's say 4 p.m. This is a crucial time where the intensity could be very, very high, right? Then consuming enough fluids, consuming water, electrolytes, etc. All right? Then the government has a role here in not just creating the shelter facilities, but also in providing water supply, in providing electricity to ensure cooling solutions, using air conditioners, coolers, fans. It is absolutely essential when heat wave conditions are prevalent. You have to remain indoors. You have to take shelter, wear loose clothing, right? Have access to drinking water and other essential fluids, including electrolytes, and there should be cooling solutions available. So government can create public spaces where public drinking water can be made available. Public shelters can be created. And this was a government function where it was left uncovered, and people who were exposed in the long run for few hours suffered from dehydration and heat cramps, eventually led to heat stroke, and 11 of them have lost their lives. This is entirely preventable. Is that clear? And also please understand, heat waves are very disproportionate in their impact. They mainly affect the poor and the weaker sections, right? The middle class, the rich, the upper class, they have enough access to shelter, water, and cooling solutions, right? But manual workers, poor people who work on the streets, construction workers, laborers, street vendors, they are the ones who suffer the most. They don't have access to enough shelter, enough cooling solutions. They may not even have access to enough drinking water, right? This is where the government should step in and take the right measures in the preventive phase itself, so the disaster could be entirely avoided. All right. Next, page number 12. The 7th topic here, related to UAPA, Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. This law is called the Primary Anti-Terror Law of India. Recently, there was a train arson incident in Kerala, where reportedly an extremist with possible links to terror outfits set fire to a train and few people were killed. Initially, it was seen as an arson or maybe even as an accident, but further investigation has revealed a possible terror connection. The individual has been detained, charged under various provisions of Indian Penal Code, and now the NIA, which is investigating the case, the National Investigating Agency, has invoked terror provisions as well under UAPA. The accused has been charged under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. So let me just give you some important facts about this law. The UAPA was enacted in the year 1967 to deal with unlawful activities. Because see, back in 1960s, we had fought two wars, back-to-back wars with China and Pakistan in 1962 and 1965. During these external wars, there were few internal threats as well that threatened national integrity. So at that point of time, the government of India enacted a law to protect national integrity, to protect the security, sovereignty of the nation, and to deal with any unlawful activity that could threaten the sovereignty of the nation. This was the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. This law was amended in 2004 to introduce provisions against terrorism, and thus it became the primary anti-terror law of India. Until then, it was not a law related to terrorism. It only dealt with so-called unlawful activities, activities against the interests of the nation, which are unlawful, which threatens the security of the nation. It never defined terrorism before this. It never dealt with terrorism. In 2004, the law was amended because the previous anti-terror laws like TADA, POTA, they had become very controversial and they had been dropped from our law books. TADA, the Terrorist and Disruptive Activities Prevention Act, which was brought in 1980s to fight Khalistan movement and other forms of terrorism, it became very controversial because it gave extraordinary powers to police and security forces. It was often misused to result in human rights violations. And because of the controversy, the law was allowed to lapse in 1995. So TADA no longer remained in our law books. All right. In 1995, there was a sunset clause under TADA. So accordingly, the law was allowed to lapse. It was not renewed for another term. Then POTA was brought out in 2003, the Prevention of Terrorist Activities Act. But this also became highly controversial as it gave extraordinary powers to police and law enforcement agencies. Quite often, innocent people would be arrested. It even, in a way, enabled custodial torture as well. A lot of allegations of human rights violations came up, right? And the conviction rate was extremely low under TADA and even under POTA. Because of this controversy, POTA was repealed in 2004. It was repealed and taken out of the law books. So India didn't have a dedicated law against terrorism in 2004. That is when UAPA, the 1967 law, was amended and it was made into India's primary anti-terror law. Today, it not only defines terrorism, it defines a terrorist act. It also deals with terror financing as per the provisions and recommendations of FATF, the Financial Action Task Force. It also recognizes the membership of a terror group. Even membership of a terror group is enough to get you arrested under the law. It covers any support to a terror act, even logistical support given from the outside to a terror act is covered under the law. And it is under this law that terror groups can be designated by the government of India. The Ministry of Home Affairs, it has proscribed and listed few groups as terrorist outfits like Lashkar-e-Toiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, NSCN, LTTE, CPI, Maoist, the Naxal outfit, Khalistan groups. They've all been listed as terrorist organizations by the MHA, which is the Nodal Ministry for Internal Security. This is done under the UAPA. UPSC might ask a question, under which law MHA can notify terror groups or proscribe terror groups? It's under UAPA. The law was amended recently in 2019, which allows individuals also to be listed as terrorists. Previously, it was only organizations, only terror groups could be proscribed. From 2019, after the latest amendment, even individual terrorists can be proscribed. So terror leaders like Masood Azhar, Hafiz Saeed and others who are based out of Pakistan, they've all been individually listed by India as terrorists. Is that clear? So that is what you need to know. UAPA is also controversial because it does have some vague provisions. As I told you, the law was never meant to deal with terrorism. It was amended and changed to become the primary anti-terror law of India. The provisions are mainly enforced by NIA, National Investigating Agency, which has exclusive powers in all terror cases. Even though the law has been amended and tuned to deal with modern day terrorism, it has been controversial because of some of the strict provisions it provides. For example, membership of a terror group is loosely defined. Quite often these powers are misused to even target those who are not involved in acts of terror, and it has led to allegations of human rights violations. All right, and the conviction rate here as well is very low. Even under UAPA, conviction rate is very low, which points to many false cases being filed under UAPA. Understood? So these are some basic facts about UAPA. Coming to the last article from page 15, it's related to a very big decision that Germany has taken. Germany has quit nuclear power. Please make a note of this. Just a couple of days ago, Germany has shut the last 3 remaining nuclear power plants. In Germany, even though it was a leading nuclear power, it had many nuclear plants generating electricity, there has always been a political position against nuclear power. Since 1970s, in West Germany, since 1970s, a political movement has existed against nuclear power because of the risk it poses, right? There could be nuclear accidents, nuclear disasters, or nuclear material might leak into the hands of terror groups. There are a lot of risks and fears associated with nuclear technology, even though it's clean and a green energy. Especially after the 2011 Fukushima incident in Japan, when the Fukushima nuclear plant suffered an accident following a natural disaster, the movement picked up in Germany to shut down and phase out nuclear power. All right? So based on this, Germany has continued on this path and it has quit nuclear power forever. All right, it was a leading nuclear power at one point, and just 2 days back it has shut the last few nuclear plants. It is going to make a switch just to renewable energy, solar and wind. All right, that's a very big decision Germany has taken. In that regard, Europe itself is divided over nuclear power. Countries like Italy, countries like Lithuania, they've all sworn away from nuclear power. They're all with Germany. But there are others like Finland, France, which are leading nuclear powers. France not only possesses a nuclear weapon, it also has many nuclear plants generating electricity. Even UK relies on nuclear technology and nuclear energy. Finland has recently inaugurated the largest nuclear reactor in Europe called the Olkiluoto 3. This is the largest, latest generation nuclear reactor which Finland has inaugurated yesterday. That's what the article is reporting. This also marks the divide in Europe over nuclear technology, over the usage of nuclear power. There are few countries which are against it, which are looking to phase out nuclear energy, like Germany has done. Italy supports that. But others like Finland, France, etc., they are pro-nuclear energy. They continue their investments in nuclear energy. All right. So this development from Europe is very important, very relevant for our prelims. So this completes my discussion on the important articles of today's newspaper. Please take up the mains practice questions. Try to practice answer writing and post the answers in the answer writing portal, for which link has been given in the description below. So that's it from my side. If you like the session, do support us by pressing that like button. Share your comments. Do let me know what changes you need, what other topics should be discussed from our end. We'll try to incorporate that. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel. So that's it for today. We'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.